All right. Good morning, Doug. We are back with questions from members of the file. This file is a private member group available to people who subscribe to Crisis Investing. If you want to know more about Crisis Investing, go to crisisinvesting.com. So here are the questions. Number one, Brett Johnson believes that the US dollar will be the last currency standing. And I tend to believe that theory. If that is true, moving assets out of the US for diversification and making it harder for my home country to take my assets because it's not a low hanging fruit and easy to take. He said, however, this is a big project. Just finding the right country, as George Gammon showed in his Argentina trip, where you can only withdraw 400 pesos per day, finding lawyers, tax considerations, establishing new residence, et cetera, et cetera. For older people like me, we do not have many years left before we meet our maker. Any other considerations are positive and negative?
Well, that's kind of a mouthful. I'm not familiar with Brett Johnson. Are you?
He's a guy who has this thing called the dollar milkshake theory. It is that the whole so much commerce is transacted in dollars. People have contracts. People need dollars thus to fulfill their obligations. So because of those obligations, it's unlikely that the demand for dollar will always still remain, I guess. So it'll be the last one standing.
Well, maybe it will, because all the other paper currencies in the world are complete crap too, and they don't have the widespread acceptability of the US dollar. So I can understand that argument, but it's on its way out, and gold is going to be on its way in. So the question that that our subscriber was asking exactly was where to go and what to do. Was that kind of the bottom line of?
Essentially, there's so many considerations, already with it, between tax planning and, place where you can get set up well. And, then you have this other thing where the dollars might be the strongest.
Yeah. Well, look, as far as where to go, where do you go? There's let's say 200 political entities around the world. I have, in my mind, the best place to be by far is Argentina today. And I know that the subscriber brought up the fact that when George Gammon was down here, he had trouble using Bitcoin out in the countryside. I think that's irrelevant, quite frankly. You'd have just as much trouble trying to use Bitcoin in the US or any other place. It's premature to try to use it as a retail currency. But okay, so let's say our subscribers, he didn't give us age, but let's say he's 60 or something like that. And he wants to get a crib someplace else in the world. Where should he go? I think that Argentina, at this point, with Milei, I think he's going to work. It's going to work. What Milei is doing is going to work. He's got reality on his side, despite the fact these unions and all this type of thing are fighting against him. Like there was a nationwide strike here yesterday that the unions put together. It was kind of inconvenient, but a big nothing. And there was no violence. And the fact that it was inconvenient for a lot of people and it accomplished nothing is going to make people think this is ridiculous. So yeah, it's going to look, pick a country that you want to go to. And in this hemisphere, maybe the Cayman Islands are your first choice, but can you get there? Financially, reasonably, everything's very expensive in the Cayman Islands. It's not the way it was 50 years ago when you could. So where else do you go? I mean, all these other countries have their advantages and their problems, but Argentina's on the path to going someplace good. And Uruguay is nice too.
Yeah.
Those are my two best choices. What else? Otherwise, you're going to go ahead. Yeah.
As I say, the risk is that there's so many things to consider that you end up never being able to make a decision because you'd be paralyzed by all of the different things you want to get lined up. So the two main things I think would be what specific problem are you trying to get away from or solve by doing this? Like what exactly is that one problem? Is it that you worry about your assets being locked into being debanked in the US or something like that? But just I think you need to define what is that fear exactly you have? What's the main one that makes you feel like you should go somewhere else? And the second thing is finding a place where you can have the quality of life that you would like to have. And those would be the two things I would think bring first. And I think, depending on what you're looking for, I'm Buenos Aires is a great place to be.
I think you absolutely put your finger on it, Ed. And one of the most intimidating factors about leaving the US is that speaking a foreign language is hard and inconvenient to start with. All right, so this means, well, maybe New Zealand, who has they've thrown out the Wicked Witch and they've replaced her with some people that are reasonable. So New Zealand is a prospect for the time being. They don't have language problems. Uh, but it's not that bad here in Argentina. I mean, one reason why my Spanish isn't as good as it should be is that everybody speaks English to me. Everybody that I talk to, except for taxi drivers and waiters in restaurants, and that's simple Spanish. So
Yeah.
you shouldn't be overly intimidated by the language problem. And there are consultants that can smooth the way and get you the documents and all this type of thing.
Yeah.
So is there someone in particular that we recommend? Is it
There is somebody I think I've shared this with this guy. I think I've shared him with a contact in Argentina that is really good for it to work with. This guy who goes by Bowtied Mara on Twitter, who I post. I think I've shared his information with you before on Twitter. He posts updates constantly on what's happening. He's a Dutch guy who's been living in Buenos Aires for the last 15 years. Married to an Argentine, has Argentine children, and he's like, so most of the updates I get, the best information I get on what Malay is doing and what's happening in Argentina is from him, from what he actually sees. And he does a great job. And so he offers some like a consulting service where he can help people get oriented and then, connect them with others that could be useful. So I've recommended him before.
is he as optimistic as I am, for instance?
Yeah, I'd say he is. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe that's the answer to this chap's question. But the clock is always ticking, so I would do something because my guess is that the Bidenistas, the Jacobins now in control in the US, are I'll take bets that they're going to be reinstalled and they're going to get really out of control for a lot of reasons. So I'd say act now.
Yep. So, but define what what you're really trying, the number one problem you're trying to get away from, not all the problems, one, and work on that one, and then pick a place, Argentina, for instance, where you can have a quality of life that you want. So,
Yeah.
okay. The next question: does Doug remain a U.S. citizen, or if your personal status is something you don't want to discuss? I'd be interested in hearing about those he knows who have given up their citizenship and if they have any regrets for doing so.
Well, I know several people that have, including one guy who's quite wealthy, quite successful, and he's quite happy having done that. Now, the main disadvantage to giving up your citizenship is the exit tax. I should have renounced my citizenship years ago when it was easy and quick and didn't cost you anything. But it's not the world we live in today. It's expensive and onerous and risky because of the way you have to report your assets. So,
As we learned with Roger Ver.
yes, that's right. That's well, and other people like that. There was another guy who made a couple $100 million in the computer business that actually caused the U.S. government, because they thought it was so outrageous that he was leaving the country after having done well, So they're the one that's when they put the exit tax on. But it's only going to get worse as the US government becomes more out of control and financially desperate. So if you're going to do it, there's no time like the present. I mean, in my case, uh, I've got businesses in the US so that the tax savings may not be that great. The worst thing about being a US citizen is the reporting requirements that you do, including filing every year, which puts you under legal liability. So yeah, the US passport and citizenship is an albatross. And if after consulting professionals, they can really look at your situation, yeah, I'd dump it. I would. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. Are Latin American countries sufficiently different from North American countries that the current university encampments would never happen in Latin America?
Well, they have, and they do. And it's funny because at this one group that I'm a member of here in Buenos Aires, where a bunch of guys, 8 Brits, 8 Argentines, 8 Americans get together every month, and somebody presents a paper and puts on a nice dinner for the group. So I went to one last night, and I was sitting next to a very presentable, hip Argentine guy, about 40 years old, is my guess. And we were talking about his daughter, and he's saying his daughter kind of hates him. And I said, well, I'm surprised. And I asked him, is she woke? And he said, yeah, she is woke. In fact, they all seem to be woke talking about that generation of people. So you can't get away from this mind virus. It's every damn place, including down here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in the bigger cities, it's worse. I think it's going to be worse in every bigger city.
Always, I think that's always the case. And always among the people that have been corrupted by college or, well, any kind of government schooling, quite frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a reason to homeschool. Yeah. Keep your kids out of it. It's the only hope. You have to completely remove them from the system or they'll be destroyed by it. I mean, they might not, some might make it out okay, but
Well, they'll be destroyed by it, and they won't like you because you don't have the same values as that they've gotten. So it's your own damn fault if your kids don't like you for a number of reasons. And that's
I
one of
agree.
them.
I agree. I saw somebody posted a letter from his 7-year-old daughter in school. She had to write a speech to give on she had to pick among a few topics, and she wrote her little speech out. And it was really well written and cute. 7-year-old girl. That was really well done. And then written on it were the teacher's notes about it. And the teacher was talking about, they had to add multiculturalism in here and, all this social justice nonsense in there. And I'm just like, dude, take your daughter out of school. Like you could still
Yeah.
save, get her out.
Yeah, that's right. They're being implanted with all these thoughts from an authority figure and it's hard to unlearn stuff. I mean, it's like learning to ride a horse. When you're learning, you pick up bad habits, it's much harder to unlearn them yeah, absolutely. Same thing.
Okay. Next question. So, what is George Soros's motive in financing and promoting the pro-Palestinian cause? It sort of seems like leftist fighting a leftist cause. Maybe it is purely the elites promulgating conflict and confusion in the U.S. through the use of the Goyim. Congress apparently is running scared and trying to appease APAC, and they're now trying to pass a you can't say anything negative about a Jew law, ignoring the First Amendment and consequently, bit by bit, rendering the Constitution obsolete. I have heard that accusations that George Soros is involved or his son involved in financing some of these student organizations, and it hasn't been denied at all. And if I was accused of that, I think I would come out and say I wasn't doing it because it's obviously bad, So I assume there's some truth to it. So what do you think is going on there? It is weird. I mean, he's a prominent Jew financing these anti-Jew protests. I think's happening.
It's been said that Soros is what they call a self-hating Jew, dating to the days when he was young in Hungary during the war. I mean, I don't know. I've never met the man. And when I've asked Jim Rogers, who was his partner in the Quantum Fund for years, uh, Jim said, well, I don't know, because we never talked about anything but the markets. So, and he would be one of the best independent sources of that type of thing. So I don't know, but this thing with APAC trying to get a specific law passed about saying anything that is anti-Semitic, which is say anti-Jew. Well, okay. How about the gypsies? Okay. Nobody likes the gypsies. They're a group that has a lot of the same characteristics as the Jews. They very inbred. They stick to each other. They don't like outsiders. Nobody likes them. Well, we ought to have a law saying that you can't even call them gypsies. They like to be called Roma now, which has become fashionable. Wait a minute, there's other groups. There's a lot of American Indian groups that feel discriminated against, but like their own homelands. Should the gypsies have their own homeland? Be given one where they can feel safe? American Indians well, there's a lot of groups like that. I mean, there's got to be hundreds of groups that are cohesive on religious or ethnic grounds that are in the same position as the Jews. So this
Or
is all,
worse. Or
or
much
worse,
worse position.
much worse. So it's actually quite ridiculous and disgusting and and just wrong in every way about that. But that's a tangent. What was the real basic question that he was asking?
What do you think what do you think is going on with him financing it? Do you think is it just the self-hating Jew thing, or is it, part of a larger divide and conquer strategy?
Or maybe he's just an evil and destructive person. He's got to, highly intelligent guy. He's got to realize that all this stuff trying to overthrow Western culture where things were stable and advancing and doing well, not optimal, but he's got to be aware of the consequences of what he's doing. Maybe he's just a really nasty, evil guy. I mean, uh, people like that are out there.
That could be it. Okay. Next question. It says, I'm in the US and I've always rented. I've been saving money to buy a house, but now wonder if I should invest more in your stock picks instead of saving more for a larger house down payment, given the current state of the real estate market. I think I remember Matt saying in a podcast a while back about it not being a bad thing to not be stuck with a home loan given the current situation. Do you think your stock picks have more investment potential or going into debt to buy a house in the US?
Yeah, well, I think it's a bad idea to speculate, especially in risky stocks. And resource stocks are innately really risky for all kinds of reasons. I don't call them happy little gold stocks just to be funny. They really are. Anything can go wrong with them. I mean, that said, yeah, I personally expect them to go 10 to 1. But I've been waiting for several years now for that magic to happen, and they've gone absolutely nowhere, even with gold going up. And the oil stocks are no better, and the uranium stocks are no better. So I could be wrong. I can think of a number of reasons why I could be wrong, and these things could go lower. God forbid, but they're very cheap. Well, should you own a house? Well, then you get into this question of, do you really own a house when, it's a fixed asset and if you don't pay your annual real estate tax bill, which in many places is 2% of the value per year, many places, I don't know, it could be more other places. Uh, what should you do? Uh, Gee, that's kind of a cosmic question, isn't it?
It really is. It does make it a little easier though for me to go against the house choice right now because interest rates are so high. Now, if you're back in the 3%, 2.5% days where you could lock that in for 30 years, that's different. I mean, but house prices have also gone up 40% since then, and interest rates are dramatically higher. So it's the equations much harder to make work, I think, now.
And it's further complicated by the fact that you can make a very good case for interest rates going higher yet. People forget that back in the early 80s, you were paying, well, the US government was paying 15% for long-term money, and mortgages were in that area. So I think they're going back there for a number of reasons.
Mm.
Uh, and anyway, look, a house is a consumer good. It's a depreciating consumer good. It's just like a car, except it has a longer life and more utility value, essentially. So you shouldn't see a house as an investment, but well, at least if you buy one, you'll always have a place to lay your head at night. A lot more comfortable than living under a bridge, no question about that. So
As long as you can pay the insurance, and which apparently homeowners insurance costs have gone up something on the order of 30% nationwide too.
yeah, that's right. And with what they're doing with the utility industry and things of this nature, I mean, this is there's not a lot of certainty in the world at the moment. So, should you own a house? Well, I guess you should, really, if you can, because what are you going to do with the money otherwise? Maybe who's that chap that says you'll? I'm not talking about Klaus Schwab, but the guy that wrote the book. Is it Webb? Is his name David Webb?
Your web.
Yes, he's saying that your securities at your brokerage firm, you don't own them either. This is a very bad. This has to do with what uh, what's his name, Bazarov said. If you want
Yuri Bezmenov.
to, Nazmanov, yes. First, you first you
Demoralize.
demoralize, yes. You destroy faith in institutions. You destroy faith in traditional values. Uh, you destroy faith in what's right and what's wrong, and then you destabilize. Well, you're way past the demoralizer, well into the destabilized part with Black Lives Matter and massive immigration and uh, this type of thing. So, what should you do? This is the type of thing that we talk about here, but there are no perfect answers, I'm afraid.
There aren't.
It's like if we lived in the 5th century in Rome, where things were still pretty good, kind of, but you could see things were collapsing everywhere. What do you do? What's the answer to that question? And what would a Roman do?
Well, I think the number one thing you want to do is you want to preserve your life, first of all. Second thing, you want to try and preserve whatever capital you have. So
That, yep. And that's what
get
we
out of
talk.
the way of you get out of the way of the barbarian hordes, I
Yeah.
guess, and you make sure your savings is not something that can be seized or debased.
Yeah, and it's a real problem throughout the ages, across space and time. This has always been a problem, sometimes more than others, and now is one of those more times.
It really is. It's a complicated question. It really is.
And that's a non-answer, but I think you got to recognize the reality as you look for a practical answer.
Yeah. I hope that's helpful. Next question. How familiar are you and Doug with the work of Steve Penny at the Silver Chartist and Justin Hun at the Uranium Insider? Have you reviewed their portfolios? I don't know either one.
I don't either. I'm totally unfamiliar with them. I mean, maybe they're fine people, but if one guy's just doing silver and the other guy's just doing uranium, maybe they're a little bit too over specialized, and that's not a good idea. So, look, buy a uranium ETF. When I buy these stocks, whenever I possibly can, I just do private placements on where I get a warrant. And if you can't do that, you might as well buy a uranium ETF or a silver ETF or something like that. And there are a lot of disadvantages with the ETFs, but at least you're not going to pick one over promoted clunker and put too much money in that. That's the big danger with these crappy
Yeah.
little.
Yeah. And I think the advantage of when you focus on one specific asset, it's good when it's in a bull market, at least, because, you're probably not gonna, you're gonna have a great track record and you probably understand that asset really well and understand that market really well, probably. But whenever they're talking about investments, they're only looking through that singular lens of silver possibilities, for instance. And so you have to keep in mind that even they probably have their investments in more than just that. They have a much more diversified view than they're talking to you about.
They have to, or at least they should. I mean, frankly. So,
Yeah. I don't know anything about them, but I'll look them up later.
yeah.
Okay. Next question. Apparently, Jens Stoltenberg, he's the guy who runs NATO now, has said that Ukraine will be admitted to NATO in July. What's Doug's view on this? I have to say, I looked this up and I saw Jens make that comment. He actually didn't say they would become a NATO member. What he said was something along the lines of that the allies have agreed to plan for a greater NATO role in coordinating security assistance and training for Ukraine. Something more like that starting in July. So, but still, either way, this is it's still involving NATO more in it is problematic anyway. So what's your take?
Well, I said starting in 1990, which is a long time ago already, that NATO should be abolished because the point of it was to protect against the Soviet Union rolling across Europe. Well, okay, Soviet Union's gone. So why is NATO still there and expanding and adding countries like Finland and Sweden, which were happily neutral in the past, and now they want to add Ukraine, which Russia has said is a line in the sand. I mean, these people are dangerous, criminally oriented idiots. I mean, NATO should be abolished. Actually, Russia is a non-threat. Say that to most Americans, and they're aghast because they've heard that it's the devil incarnate, and Putin is Satan himself. But it's all nonsense. Most people are shocked to hear that because that's the opposite of what propaganda says, where you actually have these talking heads saying that they're going to roll all the way to the English Channel, which is such a stupid statement that it almost doesn't need an answer.
Insane. Okay. Let's see. Next, just a few more here. Next question is the omnipresent messaging of oppressor versus oppressed a diversionary cover for the crimes of the global elite that is losing its grip? Will they sacrifice the citizens who have been arbitrarily designated as oppressed in order to escape themselves? Or is all this just mass hysteria?
Yeah, it's mass hysteria. It's on what happened with the witch hangings in Salem at the end of the has gone worldwide, quite frankly, where people believe all kinds of things that just ain't so, and the world is becoming destabilized. Yeah, it's actually crazy, don't you think? I mean, it's
Yeah. Don't you think the oppressors are the oppressors going to get strung up in the end, or maybe the oppressed? I mean, it feels like you're going to have some Salem witch trial stuff happening of some kind.
well, we got to ask who's who. Who are the oppressors and who are the oppressed at this point? I mean, and the shoe can be put on the other foot real easily.
Mhm.
So I don't know where it's going to end. I mean, maybe enough people in the U.S. have decided that they really don't like uh, people that are associated with the WEF for very good reasons. And maybe a bunch of people with torches and pitchforks will attack Bill Gates' compound and string him up. I mean, stranger things have happened in the world.
Well, I wouldn't mind seeing that, to be honest. Not that I'm encouraging it, but it would be.
Oh, not at all, but these things happen.
Okay. All right. He says, it's a longer discussion, but could you guys go over your financial and geopolitical game plan for the scenario in which the upcoming global monetary reset includes the U.S. going back to gold or precious metal backed currency system?
Well, it's going to be very tough for the U.S. to do with this gigantic debt that it has and the payments that it has to make to, Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security people and the military obligations that it's taken on. I mean, at this point, they can't have a sound currency. They've really got to print up more. I mean, if they want to maintain the current order, which is on the point of collapse, so they won't be able to. But from an international point of view, yeah, I think the countries of the world are going to go back to gold. And the US may be forced to actually make payments in gold at some point. But certainly Russia and China and India and Brazil and places like that, they don't trust each other's currencies. Why should they? And they don't want to use the dollar. So, yeah, they're going to use gold. Will they use it domestically? I hope so, but maybe not. I mean, this is just governments dealing between themselves, but they don't care what the cattle do, whether they're feedlot cattle or free range cattle, the plebs. So, yeah, the world's going to go back to gold, but probably not in an ideal way. But then again, maybe the world's population is going to go into collapse too. And this is very hard to predict. I'm not trying to
It's hard. It's hard to imagine the U.S. getting back to a gold standard without flushing the system first. You can't. You have to get these all. You have to have a reset in order for that to happen with all the debt and everything, right? All the obligations.
Yeah, this whole financial toilet bowl has to be flushed before you can do something intelligent. So,
And we're going to get there one way or another, probably. The hardest
yeah,
way working possible, probably.
well, we've got a 100-story building that's got a very unsound foundation and is about to collapse. So, is it better to just wait until it collapsed, or is it better to have a controlled demolition? Well, take your choice. And I'm not in charge of it, so I don't know what these people with bent psyches are going to do.
Whatever they're going to try and avoid the pain for as long as possible. That'd be my guess. So
That's a very good guess. So it sounds to me like it's going to be an accidental collapse, which will probably happen at the worst time, affecting the most people negatively.
of course, yeah. All right, just a couple more here. So, are there any ETFs or holdings in the Southern Cone of South America, like I guess Argentina in particular? In other words, if you guys are bullish on the Southern Cone, how would you broadly invest in the region in such a way that you wouldn't need to actively manage the investments?
I'm not sure that I'm bullish on the Southern Cone per se. I mean, Chile looked really good under Pinochet, but that's changed. He fills a piggy bank, and then the socialists are reelected to redistribute the spoils. This is typical for South America. Uh, I mean, I think the only place to be is Argentina and Uruguay for different reasons. For Argentina, you can buy the two of the biggest companies down here. One does urban property, and it's called IRSA, and the other one's called Oh, Jesus. Eduardo Elstein's other company called Pursuit. They both have good dividend yields. They're historically well managed. You can buy them. I think you're going to do fine.
Yeah, and there's I guess, kind of a tech play on Argentina is Mercado Libre. I think that's publicly traded in the US actually. It's like an eBay, Amazon mix. We order stuff from there here in Uruguay all the time. I know they're throughout Latin America, but I believe they're from Argentina.
Mhm.
So that's one. And then there is an ETF for Argentina. It's small, but it's called ARCA is the ticker, ARCA, and it's up 26% year to date. So as Argentina improves, this seems to be improving quite a bit too.
Sure. I mean, if what I think is going to happen in Argentina does happen, which is to say, first hundreds and then thousands of well-to-do uh, Europeans come to Argentina because they want to get the hell out of Europe. And I've talked to a number of them, and it could go into the tens of thousands. Something like that is going to do extremely well. The country will, the stock market will, great long-term play until, of course, the bad
Not
guy,
that long term.
not that long-term, right? Exactly.
Eventually it'll cycle back. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Europeans going there makes sense because I've heard it said, and I think it makes sense that Buenos Aires is the most European large city in the world.
And that may be true at this point. I mean, it looks like Europe, and Europe is looking less and less like Europe all the time. And
Yeah.
Millet is trying to pull socialism out by the roots, and that's not happening in Europe. I mean, there's no NATO here in South America. There is in Europe. There's no EU in Brussels down here. Look, I'm forced to the conclusion that this is the place to be. And of course, New Zealand is another question, and the Orient in general is another question.
Okay. Hi, Doug. You've advocated for asset diversification and having a plan B in case of political or economic instability. You mentioned Uruguay as a potential safe haven before. Have you used Cofres Fort? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And Punta del Este for secure storage.
Yeah, well, that's called Fort Box, actually, not Cofres Fort, but which is the Spanish translation of it. But yeah, listen, they've got a giant bank type safe with a 2-foot thick door that rotates on the weighs tons, that type of thing. And they offer other services. I think it's fine. I mean, the only problem with Uruguay, from that point of view, nothing to do with Fort Box, is that Uruguay idiotically wants you to declare imports of gold and silver. And I don't know if they have duties on importing these things. Probably.
I don't think so.
Well, you
No
just have
duties.
you just have to declare it. Okay, well, it could be worse.
Yeah. And you have to declare it when you're leaving most places anyway, honestly, if you get caught. So if you're moving it, you're going to have to declare it.
Yeah. Well, if you're serious enough about it, you ought to retain local legal counsel that can look at the laws and look at what the government's been doing recently. I mean, I guess I should follow my own advice and ask my lawyer exactly what the Uruguayan law on that is. And I'm sure the Argentine law is going to change for the better soon, whatever it is now.
Okay. Last question. Would Doug recommend the Dominican Republic as a bug out country? Looks had the best growth of the Caribbean islands over the last 10 years, has lots of foreign investments, relatively good infrastructure, and pretty cheap land for agriculture. Any opinions?
Well, I first went to the Dominican Republic just a couple of years after the Marines left, and they hated Americans back then, at least as far as I could determine for being an American wandering around the DR. It's not that way now, but trouble with all these Caribbean islands, whether it's the DR, you could absolutely, completely forget about Haiti, which I used to like a lot. I mean, that's totally changed. But all these islands have real racial problems. They really all do. I mean, they're all slave islands, quite frankly. So I think if you're going to choose someplace in the Caribbean, I'll bet the DR is probably about the best choice. Well, Cayman Islands is the best choice. That's very expensive, and I think it's going to be hard for you to get a residence permit there and all this type of thing. So the DR, if you like a Caribbean island, it's probably a pretty good choice. Well, you could go to the British Virgins, I suppose, but you still got these, all these places have these racial problems. Even the Bahamas, it's really a pity.
And there's a fair amount of crime in the Dominican Republic. We have some members of the file lived in New York. They're Dominican now, and moved down here a couple of years ago. And they still have family in the Dominican Republic, and they talk about the crime there. They go there, and it's like if you're driving through town at night, you don't stop at a red light unless you have to, because if you're like one car that pulls up, you could get robbed. They come out to the car, block the car, rob you. So that's what he says as a Dominican.
Yeah, you really don't want to be someplace where there's a whole lot of poor people that might resent you just because you're a white man, or a rich black man for that matter. It doesn't matter. I mean,
Yeah, you have a car and they don't.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Those places are unpredictable in their stability. And I was looking up just some details on their import and export, because the problem with these countries is they're not self-sufficient and they need imports to survive. And even with the DR, it's their food imports keep growing. So they're producing less internally and they're relying more on specifically imports from the US for food. And so these places where really you can grow anything, you find less and less is being grown there, making the place way more dependent on outside parties to make sure that they have what they need, which, subjects them to foreign currency issues and all kinds of other problems. So that's my worry with any of these islands, honestly.
Well, and as you were going to point out, fuel. I mean, all the gasoline and diesel and all this has to be imported, and it's not like these places are idols of the free market, so that the government is responsible directly or indirectly for all the utilities. Although it manages to find some way to screw that up and screw everything up, quite frankly.
Yeah. And the stuff that also about being on an island and realizing that, I guess, unless I've got a boat, I'm stuck. I don't know. It always makes me feel uncomfortable. Just a personal bias.
Yeah, especially an unstable island.
Yeah. Maybe if I was in Cayman, it'd be different.
Yeah, that would be different. But our friend Steve, even has to problems everywhere. Everywhere that's got a government, the wrong people always try to get. They're drawn to it. The wrong people are always drawn to government naturally, try to control it, make things worse. It's a cosmic problem, actually.
Like it's a Catholic problem. All right. Well, I think that's it for today, Doug, with the questions. And we'll be back next week to talk about some of the many news items that are threatening to destroy the world. That's if the solar flare that's on our way to us right now doesn't take us all out first.
Right. Well, if a solar flare doesn't get us, then a nuclear weapon released in the high atmosphere might. I mean,
Yeah, or climate change, because we really only got 2 years left is the latest word on that, right? So that's always a threat.
that's what I've heard. Yes, Greta is back on the road, supporting the Palestinians and, of course, climate change.
Of course. All right. Well, thanks so much, Doug. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Matt.